The crusted snow crunched hardily under the hooves of Mavone's horse as it trudged slowly up the inclining path. It was labouring not only under his weight, but that of a dead doe he'd found upon the icy trail. A freezing rain had glazed it the night before, casting the entire wood he rode through in a gleaming raiment of crystal, and giving the powdery snow that blanketed the ground a treacherously slippery sheen, a half-inch thick. Poor weather to be travelling in, the war mage reflected, and especially in the wilds of the penumbra, and it was due to get worse. There was a snowstorm on the western horizon, Mavone knew. He could feel it, and had confirmed it with magic the previous evening. He was glad he was seeking out the nearest settlement, perchance to spend a dry night by a real fire, behind actual walls, instead of shivering coldly huddled around a temporary heatstone, trying to sleep with one eye open. Not being constantly wary for nocturnal Gavani patrols or desperate thieves would likewise be a comfort. If his business had not been so pressing, he might have reconsidered the errand and turned back to Megalin Castle. Instead, he had elected to press on to the only haven he could reach before tomorrow's storm hit. The tiny fortress above promised the hope of that modest dream. Known before the invasion as Holman's Hold, it now bore the name of Saramal Freehold, and it offered one of the few relatively safe places left in the penumbra. Mavone had visited it once before in the previous year, while he patrolled with a couple of Kasari rangers and an iron bandsman guide. The first tale of the stronghold came from an escaped slave who had managed to reach Castle Megalin, where he was stationed. The poor man's story of desperate escape from the goblins' chains had been filled with terrors, but the mention of Saramal Freehold had captured the attention of his hosts, Mavone among them. The grateful runaway had spoken of the first castle free of the Gavani's foul dominion he'd encountered during his flight, but equally free from the rule of the Wilderlords. There were rules in Saramal Freehold, he'd reported, rules the inhabitants insisted upon. A Wilderlord might have pressed him into service. Instead, he'd been required to work for 3 days to earn his bread and fire when he came there, but the lordling who ruled Saramal had imposed on him no further after that. He'd been free to leave as soon as he was well rested enough to do so. The former slave related how Lord Sarum of Saramal had declared the old hill fort free from the Gavani, but also free from the Duke's sovereignty. Nor was his declaration limited to his lack of an overlord. Lord Sarum was quite clear on that point. All were free in Saramal, the lordling had insisted, as long as they worked 3 days for their stay. They were free to come and go at whim unless danger threatened. There were no bondsmen, no slaves, no imposition of rule outside of what Lord Sarum needed to keep the security of his holding. He'd defended the remote little tower from the Gavani and from human bandits who overran the penumbra, but he would take no side in the war. Saramal was neutral in the wider conflict across the Alshari Wilderlands, he'd proclaimed. Even the Gavani could find refuge there if they were unarmed, peaceable, and served the freehold for 3 days. Then they were allowed to leave as well, or stay if they could support themselves. That had intrigued Mavone. Unlike many of his fellow war magi, he did not see such a thing as traitorous in light of the genocidal war the Gavani were waging against the human settlers in the Wilderlands. He saw it as an opportunity. Baron Azar had asked Mavone to investigate the matter after Mavone mentioned it to his old friend. While Azar excelled at charging into battle with fury and magic thunder, Mavone's expertise concerned knowing where the enemy was and what disposition they enjoyed. Mavone specialized in intelligence, and that was difficult to do unless you had an opportunity to interact with your foe. Last year's patrol had brought him here, in the blessed warmth of summer, he recalled, as the bitter winter wind caught his face, and gave him an opportunity to size up the place and its usefulness. The freehold was remote, even for the Wilderlands, built high atop a small hill that was difficult to assail, but had little reason to take the trouble. Less than 20 acres of wood, field, and meadow stretched across the ridge, beyond the sheer cliffs of the hill. The narrow path before him was steep and rocky, treacherous even in good weather, and was the only means of entry. It was too remote to hold strategic importance, and in a region lacking in good arable lands, or woods worthy of timbering. Before the invasion, the nearest real village was nearly 20 miles away, and the first decent road another 10 beyond that.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it. at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.